What's newer is the ability to assess AI products. From our perspective, organizations are at different levels of maturity when it comes to this. I'd say you guys are super mature, and I'm not just saying that because they're on this pod. Having seen lots and lots of these, and having been part of so many of these processes, you guys are absolutely kind of in the top percentile.
What should whoever's in charge of, let's say, a recruitment tech stack, how should they be thinking about their partners that they're working with in terms of aligning with future roadmap?
The thing that really differentiates like a great partner, I feel, and certainly like our greatest partnerships with our customers, product is part of it, delivering a great product and a great product experience, but it's also the human layer that goes on top of it as well. And that human layer, it consists of just being like, firstly, giving you visibility of it, secondly, giving you training on it, thirdly, talking about what are the commercial implications, and then thinking about like, how are we actually going to roll this out? What does this mean for your process? What's the ROI going to be? The closer that we can be as humans, the better the adoption of that and the success of that feature is going to be.
This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. Now, the ongoing collective action lawsuit being faced by Workday is the latest in a small but growing line of legal challenges against potential bias in artificial intelligence. Many HR and recruitment teams have already been struggling to get their heads around what AI can mean for them operationally. Now, the potential legal risk posed is being drawn into sharp focus. Regular listeners will know how excited I am by the power and potential of AI across the business, but in recruitment specifically. I really believe that AI has the potential to reinvent an outdated and fundamentally flawed recruitment process and level the playing field for candidates from all walks of life and improve the experience for all. So I think it'd be a massive shame if this early stage but quite high profile lawsuit slowed down progress. Today, we're going to be exploring the risks and the rewards around implementing AI in talent acquisition and diving into what teams should be considering. So I'm thrilled to introduce Sam Dhesi, who's the CEO of Popp, an AI-powered recruitment platform and one of Instant Impact's most ingrained tech partners. Sam, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Felix. It's wonderful to be here.
Before we jump into questions and get stuck into all of that, I do think we should probably do a bit of a disclaimer. We're going to be talking around risk, we're going to be talking around legislation and law. So just everyone know, neither Sam nor I are actually lawyers, and nothing we're saying should be taken as legal advice. That is what law firms are for. So I think with that all behind us,
yeah.
Could you just tell us about Popp, just so that listeners who aren't familiar with you guys have a little bit of context around where your expertise sits?
Yeah, sure. So obviously we're Popp. I'm Sam. I'm the founder and CEO of Popp. We're a startup based in London. We've been going for actually just under 2 years, but just to give everybody a bit of reassurance, we are working with some of the largest companies on earth, powering part or all of their hiring workflow. We develop an AI product that actually has lots of mini products within it. It's a bit of an ecosystem, and each of these mini products or modules facilitate different steps of the process, and they can work together and in collaboration with the TA team. We put a real emphasis on ensuring that the human is involved in every important part of the process. So whenever there are critical decisions to be made or workflows to be reviewed, we bring the human intelligence in and we make that the core of the flow. And we just bring in AI where it makes sense to and where it will reduce the transactional workload involved in the process. And as a result, we're seeing some amazing results across all of our clients.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I remember before, where we really met was on a LinkedIn exchange, which seldom happens to bring the sort of virtual into the real. But it was, yeah, as you say, probably 18 months ago. And one of the things that I was really struggling with was ethical use of AI around particularly that first stage of candidate screening, which I think was probably where you guys, it was one of the two areas that you started and where this Workday lawsuit is. The thing that I really liked about you guys was how evidence-based, how you've gone about using AI to extract information as evidence rather than I guess emphasizing any or exaggerating any bias that could exist in the historical recruitment process. So I wonder, as you built your tool, and I just really liked how thoughtful you were around the ethics of it. As you built your tool, you mentioned human in the loop already. Were there any other sort of key ethical or future legal things that you had in mind? Like, these are the guardrails we need to have as we build Popp.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the overall kind of theme here is that we started at almost the perfect time, just when the EU AI Act was becoming socialized with the public, which actually gave us a bit of a head start, actually, because it just meant that suddenly there were these guidelines that we could follow and we could build a product around. And it felt as though it was also the time when AI had suddenly become more accessible as something that builders and engineers could work with and suddenly build these magical products. And there was this explosion of products, but no one was really thinking too much about the implication of building a product for certain use cases. And, when others are, I guess, zigging, we were zagging, and we were looking at, we were thinking, okay, in 2 years' time, what's going to set us apart? It's not going to be kind of, building a product really quickly, thoughtlessly, like everybody else seems to be doing, but actually focusing on, managing some of the risks that are going to appear later down the line. And so we really took the EU AI Act as like this doctrine, and we started to look at kind of what are the components of it that are going to help us kind of build the guardrails around Popp. So human in the loop is absolutely one of them, ensuring there are no automated decisions that are made, ensuring that we are constantly thinking about bias throughout the process. And there are a few others, but these are, I'd say, the three kind of core tenets of building any AI product in recruitment. And it's important that it's when we say AI in recruitment, because it's classed as a high risk application of AI, and rightly so. You're influencing like some of the most important parts of somebody's life, right? Work is a huge component of everyone's life, so it's absolutely right that it should be classified as high risk. So human in the loop, we've kind of already talked about. The way it manifests in our product is that throughout there is always a time when a human needs to come in and confirm that there are that certain workflows are okay. We also alert humans when we think that they should review things. So there's always this like kind of proactive monitoring going on. We built models on top of models to do that. Then when it comes to bias, we do a lot around bias. We pre-process data that goes into our models to ensure that it's less biased than it was. So, bias inducing factors are removed. We also measure our product's bias and fairness on a monthly basis. It's not us measuring it. It's an independent third party called Warden AI. They publicly publish the results on our website. And we've been doing that for 15 months, making minor adjustments. And now we're approaching almost, zero when it comes to, bias across a number of different parameters.
Which is a huge step up on humans.
Yeah, right. It is. Absolutely, it is. And I think it highlights this notion of, I know that there's a lot of fear around the inherent bias of a language model, for example. Right? We make extensive use of large language models when it comes to the way that our product is built, but also some deterministic models too. But either way, when it comes to AI, there's this huge kind of fear around the inherent bias from the data sets that it was trained on, which is absolutely right. But with, fine tuning and measuring and this constant kind of rinse and repeat cycle where you are making small changes, you're changing the way that the data fed into it is processed and is structured, you can get to a place where actually, you're achieving levels of bias that are far superior to a human across a number of different parameters.
And I think that's really cool. And as I said, I think one of the things that drew me and Instant Impact to you is how thoughtful and ahead of the game you guys were and continue to be there. But let's talk about it from I think most people listening, they're from HR teams, they're from recruitment teams, they're thinking of implementing various software. Right? I think everyone's getting contacted 5 times a day by 20 different, and there's some don't math, never mind, by a range of different new AI tools. I scarcely can keep track myself, and it's basically one of my key jobs to keep track of those sorts of things. So what's the balance of accountability? So from internal teams versus software providers like Popp, like Workday, like the dozens that exist for every individual part of the recruitment process.
Yeah, sure. Honestly, the accountability it's shared, and I think that's true for whenever you are an organization and you purchase some software, you're going to be applying that in your processes. Then there's always going to be a level of accountability and of risk that you're taking on. And if that didn't exist, then there would be no need for such extensive kind of compliance questionnaires. And believe me, we've been through many of them, and thousands of questions by now to test our kind of compliance to regulations, both from an AI and an InfoSec perspective. So the risk it's always going to be shared. But I think it's really important when you are kind of thinking about the vendor that you're going to take on, how obviously you're going to mitigate that risk. Now, this is a well-trodden path for regular software products. Most large organizations will have some kind of process where they can kind of procure, a SaaS product where they'll have their kind of InfoSec questions. You'll be issued a OneTrust assessment, and there's like 200 questions on it. What's newer is the ability to assess AI products, and everyone is from our perspective, organizations are at different levels of maturity when it comes to this. I'd say you guys are super mature, and I'm not just saying that because they're on this pod. I truly, like, having seen lots and lots of these, and having been part of so many of these processes, you guys are absolutely kind of in the top percentile. Now, what we've seen is all the way from working with a talent team in a large enterprise that is so excited about our product, but then have gone off and had to discover how to procure an AI product, realize there was no AI compliance committee internally, gone away and created the committee, and then we had to go through the committee, and then all the way to kind of a process like yours where you know exactly which questions you want to ask. They're very structured. We have the answers because we've been through so many of these, and obviously we're well set up for it. And I think that's where what we find ourselves doing is not just providing a product, but also providing a consultative approach.
Bit of advisory around how to do it safely. Yeah. That's really interesting. So what are the key hallmarks that a buyer, a procurer of AI technology should be bearing in mind when bringing on a new platform? I'm not talking about, here's the form, but what are the key columns you need to have in place?
So I guess there are perhaps, three kind of key, and I am just spitballing here, but I'd say there are probably three parallel kind of tracks that you need to consider. And if you are able to run these in parallel, then that is going to be the most efficient way to bring an AI product into your organization. So the first two are really obvious. So the first one is going to be finance. So obviously, how on earth do you procure this? Is there budget? Have you engaged with whoever is the kind of purse holder And is there a clear way for this product to actually be bought by your organization? I know it sounds really obvious, and I know that's but it's often an afterthought, and it's something that should absolutely be kind of, dug into, built into the process from day one. Anyway, moving on, because it's not necessarily about
There'll be CFOs listening.
Yeah,
They're really happy about that. Yes.
Get the CFO involved as soon as possible. But that said, it's often the case that until you know for sure that, the IT team are happy from an InfoSec perspective and the AI compliance team are happy from an AI perspective, it's not even worth kind of, bothering the CFO with anything like this yet. But it's important to give visibility. So that's, I'd say, the first track. The second track is your bog standard InfoSec. So again, we don't need to talk too much about this because this is a well-trodden path. I've never seen an organization that isn't well-versed in what they need to ask from a data security perspective. So invariably, we'll always go through the standard kind of process that organizations have there. And this is the one where there's always a question mark, is the AI compliance process, and there's a huge amount of variability here. So there's a few ways in which you can kind of, if you're starting from scratch, and let's say you are based in Europe, then you can use the EU AI Act as a guide, but I'm sure many have tried to do this, and there's still kind of variable levels of kind of, diligence that comes out of that, because it's actually quite vague. As you know, I think this, Felix, right? It's actually quite, it's not. There are different ways to interpret it, and the safest way to interpret it is if you think it's if you put yourself in the mind of the most kind of stringent regulator and you try and take the most extreme version of it, and you just assume that's going to be the case, which is the approach we've taken, and I think it's similar to the approach you've taken. And when we've seen that, we've organizations that take that approach will come back to us with a list of 200-300 kind of compliance questions, and there are some themes that are common throughout, which we can absolutely touch upon, but that is the place to start. The other thing, if you want to kind of short circuit this, is that because we've been on so many of these, been through so many of these kind of compliance journeys, we've actually created a repository of questions. We usually share them with organizations that are going through some kind that they're ready to kind of procure Popp, and we're going through that process. But we have this huge repository just to help these organizations to structure the kind of questions that they might want to think about. Yeah.
That, what you should do? You should build a queryable FAQ. You just send it to InfoSec.
Yeah.
Say, hey, just we've got, because you've already got conversational chat in your product.
Right. Absolutely. So we actually have this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great.
We have this. Sadly, no InfoSec team wants to take on the burden of.
If there's no form, then.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, I still need to be filling out the form. So it'll be me doing the querying and filling out.
No, I like it. So it's really interesting, and again, it's structured, it's thoughtful. Third, one of the things I keep coming up against when I speak to HR teams or recruitment leaders when it comes to the tooling is this sort of sentence where they're saying, everyone we speak to says that they can do everything.
So
if every vendor we were speaking to were actually able to deliver the quality of AI that they said they've been able to, it would be fantastic. We'd be a year, 2 years ahead of where we are at the moment, but so many promises are under-delivered on. I wonder if you could give any advice around what are some red flags if you're speaking to AI tools or point solutions that you should be aware of?
This is it's a great question, and particularly because, as we know, AI products can demo really well, and then the reality can be so far from what was actually sold. So there are a few things I think that you should be asking potential vendors for, and if they are struggling to provide that, then I would take that as at least a beige flag, potentially a red flag. So, for example, is this something that has been adopted by a similar company to you? And are you able to speak to that customer and have a kind of open discussion about how it worked out for them? If not, then it's not necessarily that the vendor has a bad product. It's just another point which might go against them because it's more risk that you're taking on. You may well be the first company of your type and size and an industry that is using this kind of product from the vendor's perspective. So that is really important. I find personally that when I'm able to put our prospects in touch with real customers, it's one of the most powerful things anyone can do. It's not just like adopting an AI product isn't just like just using another piece of software. It's a fundamental shift in the way that you do work, right? So it's a scary thing, and it's completely understandable. So I think listening to somebody who's done it before from a similar organization, it can allay those fears really, really well. The other thing is, of course, kind of from the outset, before you even go into kind of triggering a lengthy InfoSec process, you can ask some basic things like, where is your data hosted? You can ask about security certifications. So particularly, if you're in Europe, or if you're in the UK, you'd want data to be hosted locally. Mm-hmm. If you are when you're talking about security certifications, typically you'd be looking for a SOC 2 Type 2 provider or an ISO 27001 provider.
So catchy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, right? Yeah. So catchy. And typically if they don't have one of those two things, either that again, it doesn't mean that they can't comply with those things, but again, it's just another risk that you're going to be taking on. The other thing is, like any data that they share, a vendor shares, it's important to try and corroborate it. So if they're making claims of reducing, time to hire by a particular amount, then important to understand where that figure came from, potentially speak to the source, right? So we have some of these claims, and they are from our existing customers, and they really happen, and we're more than happy to put people in touch. I think that's a start for 10.
Yeah, and I think from the vendor's perspective as well, I think I had one which is just ask. I think I really like to ask the questions around, like some of the things that we did. What I've been really struggling with using AI for this, and for this reason. What's your company perspective on it? If they thought about it, that sort of goes to how thoughtful they're being rather than just jumping in with a point. And one of the amazing things about the world today is you can literally build software in minutes. But it doesn't mean that it's particularly well thought through or safe or effective or anything like that. So get a feel for what's under the hood. To that point, I think one of the really interesting challenges that any department or business faces is just the huge availability of software these days. Mm-hmm. And it's felt like a lot of companies have adopted a lot of the sort of new wave of companies have adopted the same way of working, which is let's solve a really painful challenge, in your case, reviewing CVs or resumes and candidate engagement through the chatbot, and then let's build out to the rest of the process. So a lot of companies that I speak to are in this position where they've got AI screening here, they've got an ATS, probably ATS underpinning the whole thing, maybe a CRM. They use LinkedIn. They're using Notion or Lattice as well for their internal stuff. They're using Teams. Tech stack's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but also they're just starting to push in on each other now. We're going through this really interesting phase where it feels like that's kind of what's happening in 2025.
Yeah.
What would you say? I mean, what should whoever's in charge of, let's say, a recruitment tech stack, how should they be thinking about their partners that they're working with in terms of aligning with future roadmap? If, let's say, you've got 3 different suppliers and they're all saying they're going to move into each other's space, how do you choose one from the other?
Yeah, sure. So I think you made a comment earlier around how software is becoming easier to build, and firstly, I absolutely agree that it is, but I also really think that it's really difficult to build scalable, robust software. But putting just that thing to one side, the thing that really differentiates like a great partner, I feel, and certainly like our greatest partnerships with our customers has not just been, product is part of it, delivering a great product and a great product experience, but it's also the human layer that goes on top of it as well. And that human layer, it consists of, not only kind of supporting you with your day-to-day, but also whenever we, as you were saying, like, everyone's trying to be a platform nowadays. So whenever we launch a new module and we're, beginning to unify as many of these point solutions as possible, just being like, firstly, giving you visibility of it, secondly, giving you training on it, thirdly, talking about kind of, what are the commercial implications early on, and then thinking about like, how are we actually going to roll this out? What does this mean for your process? What's the ROI going to be? The closer that we can be as humans, the better the kind of the adoption of that and the success of that feature is going to be. It's all the place to make the gains is in adoption and success of products, not necessarily the product itself. And where you get the adoption is when you have a really close kind of human-to-human collaboration. And so, when you're in the situation and you've got these three providers, and currently they might be tackling like different steps of the process, and as you say, they're beginning to encroach on each other. I guess one of the things you can think about is, who do I really want to be working with? Who have I had the greatest experience with? Who is collaborating with us closely? Who is listening to our concerns? Who is going to help us be successful?
That's such a good point. Which tool do I like working? I mean, like using.
Right. Right.
That's really interesting. I think that is such a good point, which is when you strip everything else away, when it comes to the success of a tool, it is more than anything about adoption. And actually, it sort of made me think of a point you made earlier, which is around buying an AI tool. A real AI tool is not just like buying any software. It changes how you work. I wonder if you can think of a business that has been particularly successful, perhaps combining an operating model shift with adoption of your tool, and see if there are any good lessons that people can pull from that.
There's one that comes to, well, in fact, there are many that come to mind, but one in particular, because the change in process was just so stark. So just to give a bit of context, typically we sell to either talent teams or RPOs, but we actually get a ton of inbound interest from recruitment agencies as well. And there's this one particular recruitment agency that we work with. They're a energy and kind of construction kind of recruiter, and they've really embraced the product in a way that actually many products will never get embraced. And so what has happened is we've gone through our kind of standard success process of trying to ensure that there is a small group of super users that are really well trained, and then they can kind of, once they begin to get the results from a new process and everybody else sees those results and they are drawn to it, that's typically what we see as this kind of, that's our kind of successful blueprint for onboarding any customer. With this particular organization, it just seemed so seamless. And what happened was that initial group became so incredibly kind of effective that they began to kind of hire more individuals who were just to come into this kind of small kind of circle of super users.
That's cool.
So we've had like new people, they've recruited new people who are starting out their careers just using Popp, right, as the kind of core technology, and immediately billing 3 times more than their counterparts, right, because they're just able to do so much more work. So now we've got like, a completely new breed of not necessarily just recruiters, but almost like recruitment engineers, right? So it's
it's very, and it's nice. It's nice in that recruitment agency world where any tool that brings more revenue in is going to be listened to by the rest of the business.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, I'm just aware of time a little bit here, Sam. So let me finish this up with a bit of a forward look.
Sure.
What do you think is next in the world of AI in recruitment? What's the next chapter?
Yeah, so I think like right now we are taking a process that exists and we are taking away a lot of the kind of repetitive manual burden of that process. But the next step is re-engineering that process from the ground up. So, and then just to give that a little bit more color, today, what does recruitment look like? It looks like, you have a requirement in your business. You go out and find the candidates that you believe could kind of fill that requirement. You take them through some kind of vetting process, and that might involve looking at kind of, data on a desktop and then interviewing and then ultimately hiring them and onboarding them. And this process hasn't changed for decades. And what we're doing today, we're not trying to re-engineer that process today because that's a huge upheaval for most organizations. What we're trying to do is take the pain away from that process. But eventually, we are going to need to re-engineer that process because it will reach tipping point. And so what does that mean? I think that means, this world of, we need to kind of disintermediate this world of hordes and hordes of candidates applying opportunistically to lots of roles. And then on the other side, organizations having to deal with such high volumes of applications. That's kind of the thing that we're kind of, patching right now. What we actually need to get to is a world in which candidates are, we understand enough about the candidate pool and we are able to bring relevant candidates into a workflow as and when they are available, as and when they are looking, but also just for the roles that A, that they're interested in, and B, that they are actually a good fit for. Practically speaking, that means moving away from this world in which a candidate applies to a role, right? Completely disintermediating that process and moving more towards a world in which I have a requirement in the business. There are 10 people in the world that could potentially fit from a location perspective, from a suitability perspective, from an interest perspective, and they're immediately brought into the pipeline, and the process can kind of start from there, rather than having to rely on people applying on one side and people reviewing on the other.
It's really interesting, and that feels like it flows into a couple of other trends that are going on. So internal mobility, like internal project marketplaces, those sorts of things are embryonic in most businesses, but sort of starting to pick up. I think we've just reached a tipping point that more people globally are working freelance than permanently. People getting older, people require more flexibility. It is interesting and feels like it's reached a level of complexity that it does need something like AI to be able to handle it. But it also feels like the tools sort of fit for the challenge.
Yeah, we're absolutely at that tipping point right now, and we're working on it. It's difficult because it's one thing is trying to re-engineer the future, and another thing is obviously trying to work within the constraints of the way organizations are set up today.
Well, on that note, thanks for coming on, Sam. It's been a really good conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.